From the Digital Media Center, on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts, and this is episode 108. We continue our Native American unit as our thematic unit that we're doing now on Ramping Up Your English. In our last episode, we saw the failure of Pontiac's War to remove English settlers from native land. In this episode, we see how the struggle to stop settler encroachment resulted in widespread violence, which then resulted in the removal of Native Americans from their homelands. Let's watch this video, Removal. England was a late comer to America, and even then settled only on the fringes. Then English claims grew. By 1783, England only controlled the North Country, Canada. During every step, Native Americans often had to move with these changing boundaries. After the War for Independence, thousands of people were on the move, some by choice, but mostly by necessity. For so many Native American nations, this forced movement meant giving up the land that had sustained them and was so central to their identity as people. To the Shawnee, it's known as the Warrior's Path, a pass through the Appalachian Mountains where the territory of the Shawnee and the Cherokee meet. To the Shawnee in the mid-1700s, it wasn't the Cherokee that concerned them. It was white settlers entering Shawnee territory. A Virginia colonist named Daniel Boone frequented the pass to hunt in the land of Kentucky, Shawnee territory. It became known as the Cumberland Gap. It was bad enough that an English colonist was poaching game on Shawnee hunting grounds, but now he was leading more colonists there. Worse yet, Boone started leading settlers through the pass. The Shawnee did what they could to stop this encroachment, going as far as kidnapping Daniel Boone's daughter. Boone and some friends rescued his child, while settlers kept coming. Then they took Daniel Boone captive with his hunting companions. Chief Blackfish adopted Daniel Boone into his family, but in the spring Boone ran away and helped the town of Boonesboro prepare for Indian attack. At the time of the American Revolutionary War, 12,000 colonists had invaded Shawnee land south of the Ohio River. By the time Kentucky was made a state in 1792, 100,000 white settlers were living in Kentucky. The War for Independence was just the beginning of the American Revolution. For Native Americans, the whole thing must have seemed as confusing as the way colonists and British armies fought each other. The Cherokee fought on the side of the British. The Iroquois League was divided. Some Native Americans in the North moved into Canada with their British allies. The new United States seemed to have no policy when it came to Native Americans. Settlers soon streamed into Indian land, vanquishing native people as they pleased. A more organized and sustainable plan of government was put into place in 1787 with the Constitution. While there were multiple plans discussed, the new government had elements of Native American governance, along with European ideas. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution established rights of all citizens, but those rights didn't apply to the treatment of Native Americans. The Constitution did, however, contain a section about treaties, that treaties were to be considered the laws of the land. As sovereign nations, this element had a great effect on Indian tribes. The War for Independence was ended in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris, but the Native Americans who would be affected had no voice in that agreement. English traders and forts continued to exist west of the Allegheny and Appalachian Mountains. Native Americans of the Great Lakes region saw control of their territory pass from England to the United States. One of the first acts of the new nation was the Northwest Ordinance. The Northwest Ordinance sought to bring some control to the region. It decreed that the region would have no slavery and that settlers were required to deal fairly with Native Americans. In practice, fair treatment was rare. Without English attempts to limit settlement on Indian land, the tide of white people rose. The Mohawk resisted this encroachment and were attacked. The Miami also resisted. When the United States sent a military expedition to force the Miami to allow settlement, the Miami defeated the expedition. For so many tribes, war became a way of life. The Wyandot Nation organized the Northwest Confederacy and declared lands between the Ohio River and the Great Lakes Indian land. The Wabash, Miami, Lenape, Kickapoo, Council of Three Fires, the Potawatomi, and other tribes agreed that no Confederation member could sell land unless approved by the whole Confederacy. They also set the border of the United States at the Ohio River. President George Washington attempted to impose U.S. sovereignty over that region by sending the U.S. Army and warriors from the Choctaw and Chickasaw nations. Those first attacks were repulsed by Confederacy warriors. Gathering at English-held Fort Detroit, the Northwest Confederacy planned their next moves. Further attempts by the United States at using military force ended in disaster as General St. Clair's force was attacked by 2,000 warriors led by Little Turtle and Blue Jacket at Fort Harrison. St. Clair suffered a casualty rate of 97%. It was a rout for the Northwest Confederacy and the highest death toll of the United States Army in the wars against Indians. General St. Clair was fired by President Washington, and a new U.S. Army was sent to the Northwest Territory. The United States eventually defeated the Northwest Confederation after countless massacres, atrocities, and murders on both sides. The Battle of Fallen Timbers resulted in the Greenville Treaty, which moved the U.S. boundary a great distance north of the Ohio River. England also agreed to give up their forts in the region with the Jay Treaty. The Northwest Indian Wars ended with the breaking of the Northwest Confederacy and the loss of Indian land to settlers. It did not bring any meaningful peace to the region's Native Americans, and events in Europe would once again have far-reaching effects on America's indigenous people. In France, the monarchs who had given such vital assistance to the United States in breaking away from England were violently overthrown in 1789 in the French Revolution. The excesses of the French Revolution gave rise to a new power in France, Napoleon. Louisiana was quickly returned to France by Spain in a secret treaty. Napoleon saw little value in this American territory. Thomas Jefferson was the third president elected under the U.S. Constitution. Fearful of having the Mississippi River blocked by France, Jefferson offered to buy New Orleans from Napoleon. Napoleon sweetened the pot. The cash-strapped emperor offered Jefferson the entire Louisiana territory for $15 million. Jefferson signed the deal, and the United States instantly more than doubled its size. Native Americans along the Missouri River witnessed a large keelboat being painfully pulled against the current by 50 white men. The expedition offered gifts and spoke of peace. They called the indigenous people children and told them that they had a new father and that this new father would treat them well if they accepted him. Despite this, tribe after tribe were kind to the strangers. They weren't the first white people ever to come to their country. French trappers and traders had traveled here before. The Mandans were the first to save the Corps of Discovery. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, both veterans of Indian wars in the East, led the expedition to the northern plains in time for winter. The chief of the Mandan village invited the travelers to spend the winter with him, offering shelter from the killing cold. The Mandans shared their food. Near winter's end, they prayed and danced for 3 days for the return of the buffalo. On the 4th day, their prayer was answered. The buffalo returned, and food was replenished. The Mandans gave the Corps of Discovery invaluable information about the country to the west. They were known for their friendliness, hospitality, and curiosity about other cultures. Warm relations with Lewis and Clark ensued. It's here in the Mandan village that Lewis and Clark met Toussaint Charbonneau, a French trapper who offered to interpret for the expedition. His wife, Sacagawea, and her infant son would also travel west with the Corps of Discovery. The next Native Americans to save the expedition were the Shoshone. While Lewis and Clark negotiated to buy horses, the chief recognized Sacagawea as his long-lost sister, captured by a Hidatsa raiding party when she was just a child. This miraculous reunion resulted in great generosity, and the expedition then had the horses they needed to get them through the Rocky Mountains before winter set in. The next Native Americans to save the expedition were the Nez Perce, who discovered the exhausted party stumbling out of the Sawtooth Mountains. The Nez Perce also helped them resume their journey to the Columbia River. Supplied with new dugout canoes, the Corps of Discovery floated swiftly toward the Pacific Ocean. They met numerous tribes along the Columbia, many of them gathering salmon to preserve for winter. The next group to help the travelers were the Clatsop Indians, who allowed the Corps of Discovery to build a fort and stay for the winter on the Oregon coast. Lewis and Clark gathered up and stored supplies for their return trip during their miserable stay at the damp, flea-infested fort. As soon as winter was over, the group left the Clatsop on friendly terms and headed back to report to President Jefferson. When Lewis and Clark returned to St. Louis, they were met with wild celebration. They had been given up for lost. President Jefferson learned that the expedition had achieved friendly relations with most of the Native American groups they'd contacted, and those groups now had new trading partners. Some, like the Nez Perce, considered themselves friends of this new father in the East. The Shawnee had backed the Northwest Confederation, which had disbanded after the defeat at Fallen Timbers and the Greenville Treaty. That treaty gave up most of the Ohio area to the United States. Wanting no more war, numerous chiefs signed. But one Shawnee chief did not attend the Treaty Council. Even the young United States had trouble controlling the settlers who flooded into the territories of Native American tribes east of the Mississippi River. Two Shawnee brothers took a stand against the rising tide of interlopers. One was a Shawnee holy man, Tenskwatawa, and his brother, the war chief Tecumseh. Tenskwatawa became known as the Prophet and preached rejection of white culture and alcohol. Tecumseh traveled widely to form a pan-Indian alliance that would push back on the expansion by the United States into Indian land. In the South, the Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Creek nations were reluctant to support war against the United States. Then the unexpected happened. The Madrid earthquake terrorized indigenous people of the area. Great Spirit seemed to be angry that land created for Native Americans was being given to white people. Warriors now joined the Shawnee chief. Tecumseh met with General William Henry Harrison, trying to get him to nullify the Treaty of Fort Wayne. While Tecumseh was returning to Prophetstown with warriors, Harrison's army of 1,000 attacked Prophetstown, burning it to the ground. This was known as the Battle of Tippecanoe. This followed years of destruction of Shawnee towns. The Creek Indians were divided by this movement. The division became the Creek War, a civil war between the Red Sticks and the less traditional Muskogee. British actions on the high seas and in the territory west of the former colonies resulted in the War of 1812. Tecumseh allied his pan-Indian force with English General Brock and helped him take Fort Detroit. When Captain Oliver Hazard Perry defeated the British in the Battle for Lake Erie, the English had to abandon Fort Detroit. After the death of General Brock, Tecumseh found the English reluctant to engage in battle. Tecumseh was killed when Harrison won the battle on the Thames. That was on October 5, 1813. His pan-Indian movement fell apart soon after Tecumseh's death. Some Shawnee had found refuge in Missouri by invitation of Spanish authorities. They formed a buffer between Spanish settlement and advancing settlement from the United States. When Missouri became a state, the Shawnee had to move again, some to Texas and others to Kansas. The War of 1812 again divided Native Americans between the English and the United States. Under Tecumseh, some Native Americans united to support England in a desperate attempt to save their lands. That movement failed. The War of 1812 is taught as almost a footnote in American history, but for Native Americans east of the Mississippi River and beyond, it was a defining moment. Never again would a united effort put the expansion of the United States and loss of Indian territory in doubt. The Seminoles in Florida were at war with the United States. When Seminole chiefs were compelled to sign a treaty to trade land for peace, warrior chief Osceola responded by stabbing the document with his knife. The soldiers would pay a dear price for attempts to remove Seminoles from their land. War broke out when Osceola killed the Indian agent in his area, and fellow warriors led an attack on a column of soldiers, killing 100 of them in an ambush. The United States responded with military action. Suited to the terrain in which they lived, the Seminoles, under Osceola's leadership, proved an elusive target. The stalemate was only broken when Osceola came to talk peace under a flag of truce. He was taken prisoner and died a short time after in prison. Some Seminoles were sent to Indian country west of the Mississippi River, while others escaped to Mexico. Others escaped to the wetlands of Florida, even as more white settlers moved in to the more desirable land. Their descendants remain in Florida today. The Choctaw Nation had welcomed the French when they claimed Louisiana. The Choctaw inhabited areas of today's state of Mississippi, living as farmers and hunter-gatherers. Choctaw villages were usually small, with governance widely dispersed among the communities. Their alliance with the French gave them some protection from the slave raiders and their rivals, the Chickasaws. Choctaw warriors were among those who joined with the United States in their attacks on Native Americans in the Northwest Territory. Yet Choctaw warriors later joined Tecumseh in his attempt to protect Indian land. The Choctaw were considered one of the 5 civilized tribes, so named by leaders of the United States for their size and attempts to adopt the ways of white people. An important part of Choctaw culture was the ball game. Disputes between communities and neighbors were sometimes settled by the outcome of the ball game. The ball game was much more than a sport. The game's outcome could change the lives of communities as well as the players. Small clans of family groups made up the core of Choctaw society. When Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, the Choctaw were compelled to leave their homeland and migrate west of the Mississippi River. Even amid this great distress, the Choctaw learned of the famine that sent so many desperate immigrants from Ireland. From their meager means, they sent $170 to the Irish for relief. That gift from the Choctaw Nation has never been forgotten, honored by this monument in County Cork, Ireland. During the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, the people of Ireland sent money to a GoFundMe page to provide food for Navajo elders, $1.5 million. The Choctaw Nation is happy to help elders of the Navajo. The Irish will never forget the kindness from the Choctaw over 170 years ago. The Creek War between the Red Sticks and the White Sticks widened to become enmeshed with the War of 1812. Back in the South, the Red Sticks carried out the Fort Mims Massacre, in which up to 500 settlers of all sexes and ages were killed. Only black slaves were spared. A force of Lower Creeks and Cherokee warriors and militia led by Andrew Jackson defeated the Red Sticks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend on the Tallapoosa River. Red Eagle surrendered to General Jackson. The Muskogee Nation was forced to sign a treaty at Fort Jackson, ending the war and losing 20 million acres to the United States. Even those who were not with the Red Sticks were forced to give up their land. The Battle of Horseshoe Bend resulted in Andrew Jackson being promoted to a general in the U.S. Army. That road led to the White House and the Indian Removal Act. In 1829, Andrew Jackson became president and proceeded to move all Native Americans to land west of the Mississippi River. He promised they would have land where the white people will not trouble them as long as the grass grows and the water runs. The Cherokee Nation paid a great price for peace with the United States. Again and again, they were forced into treaties that gave up their claim to much of their homeland. Presidents George Washington and Thomas Jefferson believed that Indians were good people with bad culture. They sought to assimilate indigenous Americans into European American society. This approach was promoted by many prominent Indian leaders, including Corn Planter of the Iroquois. Like the Choctaw, the Cherokee desperately embraced this approach. They became Christian farmers on their remaining land. Heeding his father's advice to learn the white man's talking leaves, Sequoyah developed a syllabary, the key to a written language. This resulted in respect and admiration by many Euro-Americans. Many opposed removing the Cherokee. Congressmen, journalists, former presidents, and others supported efforts by Chief John Ross to apply legal remedies. A ruling by the Supreme Court was ignored by President Jackson.
You Indians, get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here! Get out of here!
Jackson forced their removal anyway. Cherokee leaders who had fought the Creeks and the Seminoles alongside Andrew Jackson found him unsympathetic to their plight. The vicious Georgia militia were turned loose on the Cherokees. And thus began the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee were first rounded up and forced into a concentration camp. Well over 2,000 died while in captivity there, mostly of diseases and exposure. Some church ministers volunteered to spend this miserable time with the Cherokee. Even when the Cherokee were allowed to organize their own removal, many suffered and died. Over 4,000 Cherokee died. The main causes were exposure to weather extremes, both heat and cold, malnutrition, exhaustion, poor sanitation, and drowning. Another cause, death by broken heart from leaving their beloved homeland. Those who were called the 5 civilized tribes were all moved west of the Mississippi River, but the Indian Removal Act affected more than these Indian nations. Native Americans in the Ohio Valley and the Old Northwest were also subject to removal. Chief Glenda Wallace of the Eastern Shawnee Nation shares how her ancestors were affected by removal during a dedication of Sykes Mound in Ohio.
We were the first to be forcibly removed from the state. So when I look out at these hills, perhaps you look out and say, we're having the signs of autumn. We see the yellow, we see the gold, we see the red, and instead I look out and I wonder, did my forefathers walk here? And if they did, who were they? Because you see, we lost almost everything when we were forced to remove from Ohio in 1832.
The Cherokee Trail of Tears is seen as one of the greatest tragedies in our nation's history, but it won't be the last. Let's see what happens next in our next episode. Thanks for watching Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RBTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.